traveling far that can be. On a hippie trail lit full of zombies and breakfast with Bob. Choo-hoo.
Poncho Man, everybody! We are brought to you by HOKA, Ona, Polar, Halo Neuroscience, Velofix, Today's Plan, Normatec, Four Seasons Resort, Hualalai, Triathlete Magazine, and we're at beautiful Huggo's on the Rocks. Please welcome the three-time Ironman World Champion, one of the true legends of our sport, Mr. Craig Alexander.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me on.
I love having you on, brother. You're good?
I'm very good. Very, very good.
You're way busier than if you were racing.
No, absolutely. You know, in my years racing here, I would do a couple of, I guess, appearances that were scheduled well in advance, and the sponsors would really just leave me alone. They were gracious enough to let me prepare for the race, and so I'd spend very little time getting out and about in race week, which is in complete contrast to the last few years. But it's been a lot of fun. You know, I think when you're racing, you have a very tight focus, and often you miss a lot of the good stuff in the periphery. And the last 3 or 4 years, I've been able to just really mingle with the athletes, absorb the atmosphere, watch the athlete parade, go to the kids race, and it's been a lot of fun.
And at the same time, you're still racing at a high level at 70.3 Olympic distance. I mean, when you take this distance out of your life in terms of racing, you can be a family guy. You can basically have a real life.
Yeah, well, you know, for me, I only knew one way to race out here, which was it was a 24/7, 364 and a half day of the year obsession. The other half day was racing here the year before. So it's all I thought about. I only knew one way to prepare, and it wasn't a burden. That for me, the way I guess my personality is, I thrived. You know, I know a lot of the people around me. I used to have to stop talking about triathlon for a few months, and because it can become all consuming. But yeah, no, as you mentioned, I've taken a lot of the longer miles and the longer the training hours out, and get a bit of time to do some other stuff.
Right, and you had so much success here right away. First time out in 2007, you get second, and then you win 2 times in a row, 8 and 9. 2010, a concerted effort by basically the whole field saying, anybody but Crowe, ABC, right? It was basically they tacked on the bike, they got a good gap, and then you ended up finishing 4th, which is still great. And the mark of a champion to me is somebody who has to change. And at that point, you had a formula for winning, and that formula wasn't going to work anymore.
Yep.
And you had to change going into 2011.
No, absolutely. And I think sometimes your competition make you do that, and it's a good thing. It gets the best out of you. You know, that year you mentioned 2010, I still ran a 241 that year.
Right.
But it was only good enough for 4th place. So yeah, I think it gave me the opportunity to go away at 37, 38 years of age and reevaluate a lot of things, my training, the equipment I was using, I guess the strategy that I'd employed in this race, which was a little different to the shorter races that I was racing in. And, you know, it presented a really nice opportunity just to change things up. And, you know, I took that opportunity. I was very lucky to have some great advisors and people in my corner who I could lean on for great advice. And, you know, we came back 12 months later with a different game plan, and it yielded, you know, an awesome result for us.
Well, that following year, you're wearing an aero helmet, you're riding the Specialized Shiv, 13 minutes faster on the bike, and pretty much at the top end where the lead cyclists were, that's where Craig Alexander was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the 4 previous times I'd raced here, I hadn't really paid as much attention as I should have to the finer details. I'd worn a road helmet, not an aero helmet. I didn't pay too much attention to a lot of the aerodynamic considerations around the way you set your bike up. But yeah, it was fun to sort of, and that again, that's my personality, is that I like to check the boxes, so that gave me a few more boxes to check. And yeah, I think I was 2nd or 3rd onto the marathon course in 2011, had I think the 2nd quickest bike time that year, 4:23, and yeah, it really set my whole race up.
And that year, you not only, you won 70.3 worlds leading in, and then you come here and don't just win the race, but break the course record.
Yeah, it was a special day. Probably the closest I got to a perfect race. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect race, particularly in a longer race, because there's so much time you're out there. Not every second can be perfect.
Right.
And that's okay. I think all of us as competitors, the way we're driven, that's part of what the challenge is to come back year after year and try and make it as close to perfect as possible, and hopefully better than the year before. But it was a great year, and I did take the course record, Luke Van Leer's record. In fairness, that was a different course. So, the year Luke set the record here, it was 2 transitions. They had T2 was down at Keoho, and I think it was a much more challenging run course because you had to come up out of Keoho and then down into the pit. So, but it was the course record, and something I was very honoured to hold for a period of time.
We always talk about as an elite athlete, there's only a finite number of great races that you can do during a short period of time in terms of recovery. So you win 70.3 Worlds in September. You win Kona, break the course record, world record in October. And then in March, it was the first year, I think, where you had to quote-unquote validate.
Yep.
Right? You had to go do another full Ironman that next year. And you went and did Melbourne.
Yep.
And that was in March. And so now you go to Melbourne, and you have to validate, which means some athletes will just go and I just need to get through it. But that's not Craig Alexander. If you're going to the starting line, especially in your home country, you're not jogging. You're not just going there to finish. You're racing.
Yeah, and again, I guess you are who you are for better or worse. And I wanted to race. It was the first year they'd, designated regional championships.
Yeah,
so that was the Asia Pacific Championship. It was getting to race at home in Australia as the reigning world champion in a big Ironman race. Didn't happen too often. And for me, the most important thing was, they had named the trophies after Greg Walsh and McKeely Jones. So the male and female champions got to win the Greg and McKeely trophy. And I think those 2 athletes inspired a whole generation of guys and girls down under to do the sport. And, I was really motivated to get my name. I wanted to be the first name on the Greg Walsh trophy. So, I had my work cut out. Obviously, Cam Brown was there, Frederick Van Leer, Aniko Lanos, Luke McKenzie. I mean, it was a great field. And I had prepared well, but I had travelled a lot after winning Kona. And I had to go very deep that day. And 39 years of age, it was just getting harder and harder to recover. So, looking back at the way the sport was restructured with the new qualification process, there's no doubt I really feel I could have raced here more if I only had to race here.
The one a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is the way it had been. As a past champion, you got to qualify. And more than that, probably the only regret I have in the sport is I never got to race in Rot in Germany. And I was invited each year, but when the qualification changed, having to do Melbourne or another Ironman and Kona.
3 Ironmans in a year. That's ridiculous.
As a 40-year-old, I just didn't see how you could do all 3 of them well. And I think back now, I really wish I had have got to Germany and raced in Rot, but maybe I'll turn up as an age grouper sometime.
We talked about it because I remember back in the day, your focus was, I'm coming to Kona. This is where everything matters. I remember saying, I think they're paying some pretty good appearance fee if you go to Roth. But you know what? That's not what you were about. You were about this race and, the history and the stuff that sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you do your job well as a professional athlete, you make the money. You get the sponsors and great companies want to partner with you, which is a great thing. I wanted to win the big races. I wanted to win the races that I'd watched growing up. And even, like you say, the recipe I had for racing here, I got that from watching Dave and Mark. They used to race St. Anthony, St. Croix, Chicago, and they would have the short course season and then come here.
Right.
And they would sprinkle in the odd Ironman, but they still had a lot of short course races they would do. There was the USTS series,
yes.
Along with Tinley and Molina. They all used to race there, and that's how I wanted to structure my season, because they were the races that people knew. They carried the history and the prestige of our sport, and then you could finish your season here. And I tried to emulate what those guys did. So,
what I love is that at the Melbourne race, your bike split was 4:24:43. Cam Brown, 4:24:48. So you guys were together. And then during you're running 3:39 per K. His Cam's watch is beeping.
Yeah.
And then you end up running 2:37. He runs 2:40, but you needed to run 2:37 to win that race.
Yep.
And it was one of those, when you look back, it was like an Iron War type of race, you and Cam Brown that day.
Not just Cam too. We had company. We had Frederick Van Leer and Aniko with us for the first 10 or 15 kilometers, and I kind of feel those guys got the very, very best out of me that day. There's no way I would have run within 5 minutes of that if I was on my own. And I learned a lot about myself in this sport that day, that it's not just about the physical. I was so motivated to get my name on Greg's trophy that I thought I knew how how strong those other boys are, and I knew how deep I would have to go, but I was prepared to go there. And you know, it's interesting because about 3 weeks before, Cam was meant to do Ironman New Zealand, where he typically dominates.
Right.
He's always the fittest man in the world in
Won it
March.
12 times.
Yeah, but that year they'd shortened the race to a half because of weather. So he turns up carrying all that fitness into Ironman Melbourne, and I said to my wife, you know, this is not good news, but you know, the way it turned out, looking back retrospectively now, that's what got the best out of me. And
Absolutely.
I think you have those great days, and it's a reflection of the people you have to race. And I had a lot of respect. I'm great friends with Cam, as I am with Aniko and Frederick, so it was kind of cool that we were all running together. And the group was bigger early. Joe Gambles was there, Luke McKenzie, Greg Bennett. It was a really great field that was assembled. And yeah, but the four of us snuck away, and then Cam and I snuck away, and yeah, I just couldn't shake him for a long time that day. And I thought he had me on the ropes. I mean, I thought I was gone a couple of times, and I somehow just hung in there, and I'm glad I did.
Love it. How about a round of applause for our 3-time Ironman World Champion, Mr. Craig Alexander.
I come from the land down under. Women glow and men plunder. On breakfast with Bob.
Macho Man.